Good evening. We'll go ahead and get started with the workshop this evening. Thanks for joining us via Zoom and here in person too. Just gonna go ahead and do some housekeeping to start things off. My name's Robin Buckingham. I'm a farm planner here at PCD. Primarily work in the Puyallup and White River watersheds. My business card's over there if you have any interest in talking after today's workshop. Everybody familiar with conservation districts? Anybody not familiar with conservation districts? Okay. I will give the short spiel regardless, just in case Megan's not familiar here on the Zoom call. Districts were started in the 1930s as a response to the Dust Bowl and with a focus on conserving local natural resources. And since that time, we've kind of expanded beyond the original focus, which was soil conservation. So we have programs now that work in water quality and habitat. And then, of course, our farm team. And the primary things that our farm team do are provide educational opportunities like this and numerous others throughout the year, partner with folks to bring opportunities for folks to enhance their skills around land management on their properties. We also provide technical assistance. So that can be coming out, identifying weeds in the pasture, taking soil samples, the like, all the way up to developing a full conservation plan for your property that works with your goals and objectives for what you're trying to do and make some practice recommendations about how to manage your property. And then we also have an equipment rental program. One of the tie-ins to tonight's workshop is we provide a hay probe for rent. So if you get inspired by the information that you hear and want to start testing your hay yourself, you can borrow that from us. We also have a manure spreader, poultry processing unit, and no-till drill, and a flail mower. Variety of different implements that folks can rent from us. So I am going to go ahead and get into our agenda just so folks know what we're hoping to cover. Do a little bit of introductions. I think Joe, it looks like you had some questions just about where folks' interest for what kind of animals you have, that kind of thing. So if you're on the call and you want to type in your answer, I think our moderator can share that back with us. That would be great. And then Joe Harrison from WSU, who I'll let introduce himself when he gets to his presentation, will give us a presentation on forage quality. And then we'll have a producer panel from a couple local producers. And we'll end the night. Unfortunately, folks on the call won't get to participate in this, but I'll follow up with an email that has, some videos to the same effect about just some visual hay bale assessment and the like. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get Joe up here. I can get your presentation loaded up. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thanks everybody for being here. So since we're here mostly about horse hay. Yep. And King County as well. Person in King County, probably. Skagit. Okay. So, but regardless, most of what I'll say is related to to all species. So a bit about my background. I've been with WSU. This is my 36th year. Yeah, completed 35. Started in 1984. Came from Ohio. Grew up on a small, what I called at that point, hobby farm. My dad was an engineer. My mother was a nurse, and so we had cows and horses and pigs and chickens. Although the chickens died when I was pretty young, but I do remember getting scratch or gravel out of the driveway and taking it to put in the feed so that they had something for their crop. Those early memories. Also a memory of all the dead chickens that ended up in the potbelly stove and the chicken coop. So I'm not sure what it was, probably some influenza at that point in the about 1960 or so. I have memories of 9N Ford tractor and 6-foot cutter bar, sickle bar on the side of that, and old hay baler that we joked about. It took 7-Up cans and baling twine to kind of keep everything kind of working and the levers in the right place and all that. So baled a bit of hay in my day and threw a few bales of hay around. So I kind of know where you are and where you've been, and so a lot of dairy sheep. Okay. All right. So that's still within the realm of what we'll be talking about today. So feel free, if you got any questions at any point, just raise your hand. Don't wait until the end. And Megan, you can, I think you've got a way to send in a chat message and that'll get picked up here. So we'll try to get that for you in a timely manner. So I guess we got a little bit of a sense of who's here tonight. Mostly forage users, or we've got anybody growing for each other. So you're a seller as well. So okay, and where are you located? Where are you? Out in Buckley. Okay. Well, I used to spend a lot of time up at the Dairy Forage Research Facility in Buckley until they closed that back in 2000. So you're right there on 410. Right there. Okay. Okay. So how many of you use soil testing? Okay. All right. And then Megan and Skagit, if you use soil testing, let us know. I think that's a key piece. Yep. Okay. So that's a key piece to kind of bringing this whole forage quality thing together, because you can't get good quality and good yield if you don't have nutrients there to begin with. So while we're going to talk about forage quality, I think it's really important to step back and kind of get back to nutrient management. And I did bring a couple of soil test interpretation guides, and I'll leave these with Robin. They're ones here for the Northwest. They do a really good job, and it's they've got east-west, but for you folks west of the Cascade, the information will be the ones that'll be really important. And if any specific questions come up tonight, we can refer to those a little bit. And my understanding, Robin, is that the district also has the ability to help out with soil testing. Is that right? Okay. So that would be equivalent to like 5 different fields then? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So, so with regard to forage quality, I put this together a few years ago, and I was trying to tie together some of all the factors that affect forage yield and forage quality for dairy producers. And we got a lot of moving cogs, some of which you have some control over, some of which you don't. So obviously we got a sunny day today, although this cool weather on the east side, I was talking to an alfalfa grower in Ellensburg we're doing some research with, and because of the cool weather and the way it's changed, he's not going to get a last cutting. So he had some regrowth, but the weather's just too crappy, and so they're not going to take a cut. So there's a financial loss there for them because of the weather, and that's not out of their control. They do irrigate, so they've got the ability to control water. We hear a lot about the right type of nutrients, the right place, the right time. That's one of the big thrusts that you'll hear through conservation groups these days. And so location of the nutrients, we want to get them on there at a time when the crop's growing. We want to get the type of nutrients on there the crop needs, and so that we can get good growth. And source those nutrients, whether you're using fertilizer, compost, dairy manure, dairy solids, what it might be. So the ones you really have big control over would be the timing and amount of nutrients, as well as your source and the location. So kind of those 3 cogs. Less so, I doubt any of you here on the west side are irrigating, and just allowing for natural irrigation from rainfall. Okay. All right. So lots to manage, some of which you have some control over. So there's 3 numbers you need to get into this conversation about looking at nutrient availability in the soil, or they're subsequently from the nutrients you apply. So you want to know what your dry matter yield potential is, because that's going to get to the mass balance part. You need, for instance, we're going to focus on nitrogen tonight as an example. What's the expected crude protein of the crop? And then how much nitrogen have you applied, or have you applied nitrogen? So, so let's go through that in a little more detail. And I have actually an Excel tool that we'll pull up, and I'll let you guys give me some numbers, and we'll play around with it and see what impact it has on nutrient management. So when we talk about dry matter yield and we try to tie that in with nitrogen uptake, what we do is take the crude protein percent and you divide that by 6.25. And that then expresses the protein on a nitrogen basis. And then it allows you to calculate nitrogen uptake. So the amount of manure applied times its nitrogen content, or amount of fertilizer applied times its nitrogen content. And then I'm basically going to try to get some sense as, does your nitrogen uptake approximate the nitrogen applied? You want to apply enough that you're getting a good crop, but you don't want to apply too much, because then it could be lost to the environment, and then it's an economic loss to you. So environmental concern, but from your standpoint, an economic concern. So how much yield can a grass crop produce in a year? So this is where you get to be a part of the presentation here. So 2 tons, 5 tons, or 7 tons? What do people think? Anybody that wants to guess? Skagit County can add their question in the or answering in the chat box. Anybody want to guess? All of the above. Okay. How often do you think we get 7 tons here on the west side? Probably not very often. At least under the kind of less intensive production that we probably would typically have here for hay. Now we can get those kinds of yields for intensively managed grass silage for dairy producers. We can easily get in that 7-ton range. That's not a problem, but probably in the 2 to 5 ton range. Okay. Okay, so take a forage sample. So if we took like a hay sample, you took a hay corn sample, and that sample is probably going to be somewhere between about 88 and 92% dry matter. What you do is you take it, and if you've got a drying oven available to you, you can test it with your own drying oven, or send it to a lab, and then they'll determine, actually what they're doing is determining the moisture content that's there and subtracting that out. So you actually run it through a drying oven. So it's just a matter of drying it down. So if you had I heard people talking earlier, 125, 135 pound bales. So if that 135 pound bale, that's as is weight, it's, kind of field weight. So it's probably somewhere between 88 and 92. So let's say it's about 90% dry matter. So you take 0.9 times 135, whatever that is, probably about 125, something like that. That's going to be your dry matter yield. And the reason we always want to do it on a dry basis, it's less critical with hay, but with silage, it can matter a lot. You can have silage that's 35% dry matter and silage that's 28% dry matter, and that's a lot of difference. And so if you don't correct for that, you're really comparing apples and oranges. So you really want to keep it in the same fruit comparison. So does that help? Okay, welcome. That's okay. Yeah, from Buckley. Back in the day, maybe 35 years ago, 20 minutes. Okay, yeah, that Eli Hills, so a lot of traffic. Okay, so here's some actual forage yields that we collected. You can see the dates here back in 2002, so 17 years ago. We were doing a study at a small organic dairy down south, a couple hours south of here. And the purpose of their study was to look at applying different amounts of liquid manure from their own lagoon. And they were interested in kind of looking at what kind of growth they got in this forage, particularly during the early winter time with different manure application times of the year. So the control Didn't receive any manure at all during the course of the study. And that's the bottom line. And then the next line up, the blue one with the diamonds, is their 1X rate, which is a really, really fine rate. It's about, gosh, maybe 1/8 of an inch of liquid manure. I mean, it's really, really thin spray. And that was their standard amount. And we said, well, it'd be nice if we could kind of double that up because we think the crop could use more nutrients than what you're putting on. So we had them 2X rated. So that was up to about, maybe 1/4 inch with that higher amount. So on these different dates, April, May, then July, and then August and September, these are all the different cutting dates. And this is the cumulative dry matter yield. So at the beginning, they've gotten yields of somewhere around, on average, about 1/2 ton per acre. Then at that next cutting, they added about another ton. The next cutting about another ton. And then after that, there really was not very much production. So most of their production was by the middle of July. Didn't do much irrigating there. So I think that was a big part of it. But anyhow, you can see that it's reasonable to get somewhere in that 2 to 3 tons. And that nutrients are a big part of making a difference in the yield. So while I don't have the protein data on here, I didn't think to throw that slide in, but the protein levels in these 3 different cuttings or 3 different treatments would have been different. Would have seen higher and higher protein levels because there was more nitrogen being applied. So, so how much nitrogen? So we're got some agreement somewhere between 2 and 5 tons yield. So we agreeing on that so far. So how much nitrogen can a grass crop uptake in a year? So 120, 240, or 450 pounds. So, anyone guess? Yep, per acre. Yep, sorry about that. Per acre. So if we've got, say, 3 tons and 12, 15, 16% protein. Go ahead. Okay, could get that much. That'd be with a really good yield. And with, so we'll go through some actual calculations there. Now, so how many pounds of nitrogen are people applying a year to get that nitrogen uptake by the crop? So do you apply fertilizer? I'm gonna put you on the spot. Do you, okay. Okay. Yep. Okay. Okay. So one of the things you'll get back when you do your soil test is a number called organic matter. And what we do is we give, this is a thumb rule, is that for every 1% organic matter that's there in the soil, you can say that that soil will give you 20 pounds of nitrogen. So do you happen to remember what the organic matter was? Okay. Okay. So what we do is we allow 20 pounds of nitrogen per 1% organic matter up to 5, and then we quit. So we don't keep adding it after that. So if it had 5, so if it had above 5% organic matter, what we'd do is say that soil in itself could probably provide, without any supplemental nutrients, could provide about 100 pounds of nitrogen. Now you can't keep doing that forever because the organic matter will decline. But so that's why, for instance, in this, even though this is not, well, this is cumulative nitrogen. Oops. Let me see here. Okay, so this is cumulative dry matter, which we talked about. Now this is nitrogen. So on that same field from down south, then this was the nitrogen uptake that we got. So we guess you could get as much as 240. Well, in this low intensive organic dairy down south, they didn't get that much, but they weren't fertilizing very heavily either. So they easily got up into the 120 pound rate. Okay. So when they did not apply anything, which is the lower line, which is this line down here. Can you guys see that? Okay. So down here, they were getting about close to 60 pounds of nitrogen that was being taken off in that without any fertilizer being added at all. And the organic matter there was probably in the 3 to 4% range. Again, that's pretty low intensity. They had not heavily manured these fields previously, so a lot of acreage and a few cows. So yeah, so getting upwards of this 120, I think is kind of a reasonable target. You know, you'd have to have some pretty good yields, I think, to be able to, and maybe some irrigation if you're going to start pushing a couple 100 pounds of nitrogen coming off. So. Yep. And I didn't go back and look at the soil test, but just kind of using my best memory from 17 years ago, 16 years ago, it seemed to me they were in about 3 to 4% organic range. So that would say that that's what they could get. Now, that was that year. The next year, if you don't apply, you know, it's going to continue to creep down on you. So, okay, got to replenish the reserves in the bank. Okay, so what we're going to do now, and have a little help here from Robin. How do I get that spreadsheet up? Okay, so we're just going to play around with this a little bit, kind of reinforce what you've already told me. So we agreed that we probably have somewhere around what, maybe, let's say 4 tons would be really good in this area. Okay, and then what kind of protein are you seeing on hay that is purchased locally? Okay. Any other numbers? Okay. So if you correct that over, so if you take 9 divided by 6.25, that's the equation that's up there. That gives you 1.44% nitrogen. So that's 115 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Okay. So that's how much nitrogen you would need to be adding to try to get at least crop removal, to meet that crop removal. So that gives you a target to go back and look at for if you're growing. Now, hello, how you doing? Good. Got out of the chopper? Got out of the baler, got out of the chopper? Okay. Well, nice crisp day to be doing farm work. So then we've got this also set up, and this spreadsheet's available. I'm gonna leave this for Robin and whoever else wants it to feel free. There's no secrets here. But you can also, if you're applying liquids, so for instance, you had liquid fertilizer, so however many gallons, and this is in thousands of gallons per acre, so I don't know how much yours was, then you could put in what the nitrogen content was, and then it would give you your nitrogen rate per acre. Or if you had acre inches, some people that are irrigating look at it that way. And then we also have this in here where you can look at compost. Is anybody applying compost? Okay, you are. All right. So do you know how many tons per acre you're putting on of compost? Okay. So yeah, 10. Okay, let's do that one. Just play around with that a little bit. 10. And then what do you think the nitrogen content is in it? Let's see if I put any numbers in here. You know, I didn't grab any numbers. You Google. Google it quick, see what comes up. That's what I usually do. Google's my friend. So if you put 10 tons on, and it does have 5 pounds of nitrogen per ton, that's going to potentially give you 5 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Now with compost, you got to realize you get some of it the first year, some of it the second year, some of it the third year that's available. But if you're putting it on every year, and you're putting it on at the rate that nitrogen comes off, basically what you can say is that whatever goes on that year comes off. Does that make sense? It's kind of, you kind of have this decay curve thing, but if you're always putting on, let's say you're pulling off 100 pounds of nitrogen a year in your hay crop, and you were putting on year after year after year 100 pounds of compost, or maybe 100 plus, you could say that you're going to be getting, you know, that much nitrogen availability. So, and then this also includes, you know, if you wanted to look at using fresh manure in yards per acre. And so this is available. It's not rocket science, but it's kind of nice. You can just do the calculations quick. Yeah. Yeah. So.
What I'm seeing is that it's consistent with what you're saying. After 30, 40 years doing this every year, it hasn't, the crop of grass, you don't make hay out of it after the horses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sustainable. Yeah, it's another way of looking at it. Yeah, it's essentially that's what you're looking for. So. Yeah. Right. Yep. You're gonna lose it there. Yep. Okay. Any numbers for I? Okay. So yeah, at least that gives you a feel for how to do the numbers. And so, okay. So how does all this relate to forage quality? Well, to get protein in a crop, we got to be applying nitrogen. To get phosphorus uptake, we got to have phosphorus there. Potassium, important nutrient. You know, oops, okay. I can hit it down here. Take it in there. Yep. Okay. There we go. Okay. So this is a picture of a forage cell. This one. Yeah. Oh, you guys. Okay. So we're going to go through a lot of terms and some chemistry and what it means for forage quality. And so I'm going to try to start it out simple and build on it, see if it ends up making sense. At any point, it's like, I don't understand. Just raise your hand, do this, whatever, and we'll stop there and try to. So in a plant, you've got two types of cell walls. One's what they call a secondary cell wall, and that's the one that's inside. It's kind of yellowish. And then you have the primary cell wall. And what they're doing is they give structure to the plant, and they give structure to the trees that are out here. And there's a compound in there that's called lignin. And lignin is what helps things stand upright. And trees have a lot of lignin. But with a plant, we don't want a lot of lignin, because what that lignin does is it encrusts the other fiber that's there, kind of coats it. And then the bacteria that are in the horse's gut or the cow or the sheep can't get through that lignin to get at the cells. And so as the crop gets more and more mature, there's more and more of that lignin. So that surrounds more and more of the cell fiber that you really want to have available. Okay, so that's one really important thing, and we'll actually show how with increasing maturity you get more and more lignin, and then the digestibility goes down. So we'll actually show you some data on that. So that's why we want to harvest the forage as immature as we can. So far with managing the forage up in Buckley, what's kind of the earliest cutting date you have in the year? Okay. 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 Okay, so you mowed everything down and then didn't take that up, and then so you did so you baled the regrowth. Okay. Okay. So all right. So so we'll get at this calendar schedule a little bit. The other thing is if when you're growing the crop and it's getting more mature, you think about more lignin, but you also think about these cell walls. And what they're doing is they're getting thicker and thicker. So if the cell wall is getting thicker and thicker, that means there's more fiber, and that means there's less of what the contents are here in the middle. And so the contents here in the middle are in particular sugars, which provide a lot of energy and to feed the bugs in the animal's stomach. So anything that creates a smaller cell content or a smaller hole there in the middle is also going to decrease the energy value and make it less digestible. Okay, so if you can remember that from this visual, that'll really be helpful as we go ahead and move forward here. Okay, so now we get into all these terms. So we got forage components. So we have what are called the cell contents. So those cell contents are what's here in the middle. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about cell contents. And when we talk about cell wall, what we're talking about here on this side of the graph, that's what we're talking about in this green and yellow layer. Okay, so we've got the fiber and we got the non-fiber part. Okay, so in the cell contents we have lipids. Lipids are fats. There's not a lot of fat in forages, but there is some fat there and some fatty acids, and that's an important energy source. We have soluble sugars, and in some case starches, depending on the type of crop we have. And those are important sources of energy for the bacteria. Then we have nitrogen that's present in that cell contents. Some of it's in the form of protein, some of it's in NPN, which means non-protein nitrogen. And then we have our minerals like calcium, phosphorus, potassium, and then those will be considered the macro minerals. And then we have the micro minerals or the micronutrients. So typically probably feed some a grain supplement for your horses that provides some vitamins and minerals, I'm guessing. So a lot of these micros, we don't think of hay necessarily as being a mineral source for our animals. It does provide some basal levels, but we typically, when we have our grain supplements, it's going to be supplementing vitamins and minerals. And we get in on this side, we look at the cell wall contents. If we look at both of these, the primary and secondary cell wall, they're made up of what we call a fraction called neutral detergent fiber, or NDF. And NDF it's a procedure that was actually developed by a guy by the name of Van Soest that grew up in Snohomish County, Washington State, went to Cornell, is a very famous researcher. I don't know if Pete's still alive or not, but if he is, he's got to be about 90 at least. But anyhow, he developed the procedures for analyzing forage cell walls. So this NDF, and then there's another fraction called ADF. So NDF is to get our best guesstimate of all the forage fiber. And the forage fiber is made up of pectin, which is kind of a glue that holds the cells together. We have a fraction that's called ADF, and that ADF fraction has cellulose in it, lignin, lignified nitrogen, and then silica, which is a sand-like material. And then we have another fraction that's called hemicellulose. So pure cellulose, to give you an idea, so if you've got blue jeans on, that's cotton, that's pure cellulose, okay? So if you were to take a clipping of your pants, send it in, have it analyzed, came back, the ADF value that would be there would give you an estimate of what the cellulose content is. Okay. So that's kind of how we break these things into the cell wall part that the bugs eat, but they also can use some of the cell contents. And so we need this part to be really digestible. So we want to harvest it as immature stage is reasonable. Okay. So this is data from here in Puyallup Valley. This was actually collected back in the, I think, 1960s by the dairy scientists over here. And what they did is I think this was primarily orchard grass, but they harvested it out here on Pioneer. And they started, and this is why I was asking about the harvest date. They started harvesting this around 23rd of April. And I realized from having worked with crops in Buckley, there's about a 3-week difference minimum in the cycle between Puyallup and Buckley, at least. And so, so a 23rd of April here is probably a beginning of May type thing in Buckley. So here in the valley, it would have been vegetative stage, and then it progresses into pre-boot, boot, heads emerging, full head, early bloom, and then full bloom clear out here at the beginning of June. So you can see what the digestibility does is we go from something that's 75% digestible, 75% available to the animal, to down here where you're approaching nearly 45% of it's just going out the other end of the animal. The animal's not getting any use out of it. It's just producing more manure or potentially more compost. Yep.
So what the conclusion I'm drawing from that is that I want to be mowing as soon as I go out in the field without destroying it.
To keep it, yeah, or if you're able to do, people will do rotational grazing. And I don't know if that's something the district's been trying to, or if you do it with your horses, but yep. 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 So, yep. So the question was, does this relationship between digestibility and calendar date hold true regardless of how you're using the forage, whether it's a hay or a silage or it's being harvested by the animal? And yes, it does. So, okay. But if it's getting eaten here and it regrows, now, yeah, so the subsequent cuttings, like you were mentioning, your regrowth, your second regrowth, actually be your first regrowth and your second regrowth. The digestibility of that will never be as high as it is here in the beginning of the year. It'll probably be more in like about this boot stage of digestibility. Your forage will never be as digestible as it is here in the very first part of the year. Okay. Now, if you're grazing, it's just life. Well, if you're growing crops, I mean, so that's why a lot of people say, I want that first cutting if I can possibly get it. So less so on the east side under alfalfa production, but certainly this holds really true here on the west side. Okay, so more numbers, more breakdown, and again, the reason I wanted to show you this slide is it again kind of helps you put some numbers towards it. So when we have fresh, and then what happens is you take a fresh forage sample and you make hay out of it versus making silage out of it, because a lot of times that becomes a confusion on, I have the hay test or I have a silage test or I have this fresh hay sample, and how does it relate to baled sample? So for instance, we're going to see some hay samples later, and there'll be some hay tests associated with those. Well, what would that crop have looked like when it was a fresh crop before it ever got mowed down and it laid there in the field, and some of the sugars were used to help keep the crop alive until it got to that critical dry matter where it was, quote, dead. So as we go down through this, what we see is if we take fresh forage and we compare it to hay, the ash content will usually increase. Well, it's not that the ash content increases, it's the same amount of ash, but we have less soluble carbohydrates. Okay? So because there's less of something that isn't lost has got to increase relatively. So you might have an ash content of, let's say, 8 in a fresh crop, but when you go and look at the ash content of hay or silage, it'll be like 10 or 11 or 12%, because we have lost some of these sugars, for instance, while the hay is laying there in the field. Okay? And if it gets rained on, it's even worse. It'll make those values go higher. Okay? So crude protein, what happens there? Well, it can go either way, plus or minus. That one's a tricky one. NDF, typically what you're going to do is see it go up slightly, as well as ADF, so your fibers go up. And again, most of this is happening because your sugars are decreasing. And then your vitamins and fats, again, because the pectins and sugars are going down, you'll tend to see a slight increase in these. So that's one that's come up in the past. And when people say, well, I have a fresh sample, how would that relate to maybe what's in the bale? And you can say, well, it gives you a ballpark idea, but it's not going to really be going to give you a totally accurate idea of what's going on. Okay. And then as we get into silage, we end up with things like ammonia, which can be lost off of the atmosphere. So then that's another loss. And then with silage, we also end up with some of the sugars being converted over to acids like lactate, all the fatty acids, and carbon dioxide. So that's another loss. So the farther we go down from top to bottom on this this page, the more losses we see. Okay. So it's never more digestible than right here at the top. But we can't always have what's there today. I mean, you know, you're going to have tomorrow and next week, and so it's going to get more mature. So, but it's important to understand that these differences do occur. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. So this gets into the silage part. I don't think we have much on silage in this group, but I'll go through it anyhow. So what we do, and we chop silage, is basically like making pickles or sauerkraut. And in fact, an interesting story is Nallie's Fine Foods, which was in Tacoma years ago. I don't know if their plant's still there now or if they are, what they're called, but yeah. So I had a microbiologist other came to me and he said, we have all these bacteria that are left over after we make pickles. And what we're doing is this stuff goes through the wastewater treatment plant in Tacoma, and we have to pay, just like other ratepayers, we have to pay to have this stuff processed. Well, these bacteria ought to be worth something and ought to be valuable. So what about let's work on a project where we look at these bacteria for making pickles and see if they're good for making grass silage or corn silage. And so we did that. It was a really fun project, worked on it for a few years. They got a patent off of it, which was kind of neat. Never went anywhere because, again, then Nallie's kind of went out of business. That microbiologist went off and worked somewhere else and so forth. But it was just a fun project to be involved with. So anyhow, it's taking those same type of bacteria that are there for pickles and sauerkraut and adding them to silage. And then what we do is we go through what we call an aerobic phase, where we're trying to get the oxygen out, and we go through this lag phase, and then we get into this heavy fermentation phase. And this dashed line is a reduction in the sugar content of the forage because the bacteria are eating that. And then this is an increase in the acids, so that it is essentially pickling the forage, so that this line right here is actually the pH. So we have a decrease in the sugars, which is bacteria are producing acids out of it, and then decreasing the pH, and you get into a stable phase. That's basically what's happening with silage. Okay, so when you do that, one of the reasons why we get some, I'm going to go over why we get some losses during silage fermentation. Typically what you have is glucose will go to lactic acid, and energy recovery there is about 97%. We want a lot of lactic acid because that's a really strong acid. Heterofermentative type fermentations, which means they have multiple substrates, in this case glucose or fructose. So in this case it goes to lactic acid, but it also can go to ethanol, which ethanol is an alcohol, and alcohol doesn't have any ability to lower pH, so it really doesn't do us any good in that regard. We also get some production of CO2 here. With fructose, we get lactic acid, mannitol, another alcohol, and we get acetic acid. Now, what do all of you know that you commonly use that's acetic acid? You probably have in your kitchen cupboard. Vinegar, okay? So the smell of vinegar, that's acetic acid. So if you ever have a forage sample, silage sample, it smells a lot like vinegar, it's gonna have a lot of acetic acid in it. Okay, so a couple other fermentations, ones we don't like, Clostridia. They're there in the soil, so that's why we like to keep soil contamination out of our silage if all possible. What happens is the good bacteria produce lactic acid, then the Clostridia take that lactic acid and produce butyric. Butyric is a really nasty smelling one. It produces CO2 and also produces water. I think it's supposed to be water here anyhow. But the energy recovery is 81%, whereas in these fermentations, our energy recoveries were high. They're approaching 100%. So another reason why we don't like the Clostridia is we have this reduced energy. And then with yeast fermentation, and this is typically going to happen in corn silage, it's taking a glucose, converting it over to ethanol, which doesn't do anything really to lower the pH. The energy value is pretty high, but what happens is these silages aren't very stable. They get slimy, they get hot. The animals don't like to eat them. So on an energy basis, it looks great, but from a practical standpoint, the animals just don't like it. They refuse to eat it. Okay, so forage terms, dry matter digestibility. So many forage analyses will include a value called digestible dry matter. And while different laboratories use different formulas to calculate it, one common one is this number here. It's percent DDM equals 88.9 minus the basically 0.8 times the ADF value. And again, remember that I said that the higher the fiber value, the lower the digestibility. So in this case, they found a good relationship with ADF value. So an example as shown on the bottom would be if the ADF was 31%, then the digestible dry matter would be 88.9 minus what's in the parentheses here, which is 0.779 times 3.1 equals about 65%. So if you had an ADF content that was higher than 31%, would the digestibility go up or down? Up or down if we have more fiber? Down. Okay. Welcome. Okay. Now, so that's looking at how digestible it is. Now, the other thing you want with animals is you want intake. So you don't want them to be digestible, but they need to consume a certain amount of that per day. So after doing a number of studies decades ago, they found that feeding studies have shown that the percent NDF, in this case, is highly related to intake. So it's that total fiber that relates to how much you can get into the animal's body, whereas it's the ADF part that's really more closely related to how digestible it is, okay? So that's why we're using two different terms there. So the formula to do that dry matter intake as a percent of body weight is 120 divided by the percent NDF. So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about, or you'll see it reported that a certain forage would have a certain amount of intake on a percent of body weight basis. And so the calculation on doing that is shown that here down below, where in this case we had a 40% NDF. Dry matter intake is going to equal 120 over 40. So that particular forage, the animal could eat about 3% of their body weight. So what's typical horse weight that you guys have that you're 1,000 pounds? So what's 3% of 1,000? 30. Are your horses eating 30 pounds of hay a day? Okay. Okay. So horses that are maintenance versus working, there's going to be a difference in that dry matter intake, and you're going to feed them a hay that's got different fiber contents. So anyhow, this is one that can be used. I give an estimate. So interesting for you to play around with what your NDF content is in your forage, and then what you think the animals are eating on a daily basis. Okay. So NDF and ADF, and that's how they play in. ADF's really related to digestibility. NDF's like how much can you get through your system. Okay. All right. Other forage terms, RFV, relative feed value. So you'll see that listed as related to forage quality. Keep banging that. The dry matter intake potential may be reported such, but it may be used to calculate a term called RFV. And so what this does is it combines the dry matter intake along with the digestible dry matter. So it's kind of a combination factor, an indicator, and it doesn't have any units. Okay, so we're taking the percent dry matter, digestible dry matter value times the percent dry matter intake. We're taking a percent times a percent, which seems goofy, but all we're doing is really trying to come up with a ranking factor anyhow. So as long as everybody's accepted that it's goofy, but it's okay. So we had dry matter digestibility 64.75, and that was from our ADF value. We had the dry matter intake of 3%, which was from our NDF value. So if we take those and we plug them into the equation, this particular feed with those NDF and ADF values would have had a relative feed value of about 151. Okay, so that's how they come up with those numbers. All right, so what it's trying to do is use a single value to say how digestible is it and how much will the animal eat. Okay, so it's like two factors rolled into one. So you can kind of think of RFV that way, relative feed value. Okay. That's the same thing I just said. Okay. So, and working with Robin and getting set up for this talk, I want to make sure we gave you some idea. And then that chart with the graph and decreased digestibility, I was able to show you here in the valley what happens with orchard grasses that went from that vegetative state out to full maturity. So in this case, what I'd like to do is kind of focus in on this part down here. Oops. At the bottom, let's look at this Timothy, because it goes from vegetative all the way down to a very mature material here, or out the 12th of September. So the NDF content is pretty low here, vegetative stage. The ADF content's 25, so we've got about 50, you've got about 25. Lignin's about 4%. And this is the, then as we go up in maturity, so we go to the boot stage now, we're up at about 57%. We get to full and fluorescence or full maturity, we get to about 63. And then as they look at these at different stages of regrowth, then the NDF comes back down around 52, 53, 62, 64, and so forth. And then probably in about here, they did another regrowth because the numbers drop back down again. Yeah, these were different. I would say these probably were vegetative boot, first fluorescence was sequential cuttings. And then my guess is these are regrowths, just based on the numbers, probably up to about here, and then this was regrowth again. So when I mentioned earlier that you'll never see the digestibility be as good as it is when it's at first vegetative, so we see this represented here by this low NDF and this lower ADF. And those are the lowest fiber values we ever see anywhere on there. Now, and then the lignin content as we go on up. Also, as I mentioned, there gets to be more and more of it, so it surrounds all that fiber. So it goes from a value of 4% here up to almost 5%, and then here almost 7%. So, okay. Now, okay, well, here's where these regrowths are. So yeah, these definitely are regrowths down here. Okay. So, also want to try to relate this back to some numbers you've looked at or bought hay off of or you've used for feeding your animals. So in this case, this is for hay intake for beef cows. So forage quality being excellent, good, medium, or poor. Protein content 14, 13, 8, or 4. So as you guys mentioned earlier, you're talking about an 8% protein hay. TDN in this case would be about 51%, so about half of it's available. About half of it's going out the other end of the cow. Intake as a percent of body weight if the cow's dry, about 2%, and if the animal is lactating, about 2.5%. Whereas if you get a little better quality, say if you even go to good, you're going to be able to get 2.5% of the body weight or almost 3% of the body weight here. And again, if you go to an excellent, then you're going to be able to get much more intake in the animals. So again, it ties back to the forage or the fiber, amount of fiber that's there. So these, then what you do, with beef cows, it gets a little more difficult to kind of say this particular hay is going to meet all these different needs. So what you really need to do then is end up referring to a nutrient requirements table. So I stuck that in here. And so if you have, these are listed as months to calving. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 months to calving, and whether you have a 1,000-pound or 1,400-pound cow, how much dry matter intake does she need? What's the TDN, net energy, and what's the crude protein? So basically you can then use this table to match up with your hay quality from here. You got to get an idea how close you are to meeting your needs. Or as we talked about when we were preparing for the conference today, if you got a lower quality, how much more grain and what's the nutrient content of that grain going to have to be to meet the needs of my beef animal. Okay, for horses, I pulled this off. This is from Colorado State. And these are some recommendations for maintenance, breeding stallion, performance, broodmare, growing horse. Crude protein levels, these typically what you guys are shooting for. Okay. And then here's the fiber numbers, kind of in the 30s, maybe approaching 40 for these. And then your neutral detergent fibers. Okay. And then getting back to that RFV classification, here's the RFVs for these same set of animals, the horses. So you're gonna want these higher RFVs, say up and pushing that 150 range if you got these performance animals, or in case of broodmare. Okay. Fertilizer guides I mentioned to you, if you do get into doing your soil test and looking at it, these guides can be pretty good. One of the things I know that Robin's interested in trying to get people to think about is adding lime. It costs money, but our soils get pretty acidic here in the West. So it may be something to be looking at, is trying to add some lime. And so there is a, what's called an SMP. I'm not sure what SMP is, but it is an estimator for lime. And based on what that test number comes back, then here gives you some recommendations on how much. This is going to be related to pH of the soil, and then if you're looking at renovating pastures and hay, here's a bullet, and I think this one, yeah. And Marty Cheney's within our CS out of Olympia, and then Steve Franson used to be here at Puyallup, but he's in Eastern Washington now over at Prosser. So that's what I had. I'll take any questions. If we have anything coming in from Skagit, I'll try to answer dairy sheep questions, right? Or find somebody to refer you to. So my office is just out on Pioneer. Give me a shout. Let me know. Robin knows how to get a hold of me. There's some things we can do. So yeah, it's no secrets. Yeah. It's what I found out through the years. I got one that gets into the whole farm nutrient balance stuff. And what the fun part about it is, I can be at a workshop like this, and I can get someone to agree to say they'll have their farm be the guinea pig, and then everybody else in the room can say, well, what if we change this on your place? and so you can get some real quick learning without it being a research facility, or you're using people's real numbers. And so that's where it gets to be fun. And it's low risk because you're just throwing it here in a classroom rather than actually changing it on somebody's operation where it's costing them money. So, okay. All right.
I'll go in front of our live web audience over here. We're still waiting on one of our additional panelists. So at this point, if folks want to take a break or anything, use the bathroom real quick, can do that. I am just going to go ahead and put up a placeholder. What's that? Oh, he's coming in. Placeholder screen here in the background. Yeah. Good evening. And our other panelist is here, so I think we'll go ahead and get started, folks. The academic side of the topic. Oh, yes. Has a long history in the academic side of the topic, but I also wanted to get some producer perspectives involved as well tonight. And so we've got two folks up at the table. I'll let them introduce themselves shortly. And folks, just to start out, maybe talk a little bit about who you are, how long you've been doing what you're doing, and a little bit about your operation. Go from there.
Okay.
My name is Jake Devaney. I'm out of Enumclaw. I've been farming on my own about 10 years now. I do small bales, I do hay with the small bales, and then I do commercial herbicide, tillage work, custom planting. We're doing corn silage, grass silage, do dairy stuff. So a little bit of everything, too much some days.
I'm Dan Dionis. I moved to the area in 2015 up on the plateau. I grew up in that area. Moved out of state for about 40 years and moved back in a semi-retirement state. But the place I got, about 21 acres, the guy was doing some horse boarding and cutting hay or having hay cut. And I said, well, yeah, I don't know about horses, but I could run a few cattle and put up a few bales. And so I went into this thing kind of blind, not realizing the science behind it. You know, my folks had cattle when I was a kid, and well, I'll throw a couple bales out and everything's good. Well, it's not quite that easy. 30 head later and raising cow-calf operation, there's a little more to it than that. So I blame my ignorance for getting a slow start. There's no excuse for it because the resources are available, the data is available, and I started analyzing hay not because I was trying to hold my producer accountable, but I needed to know if I'm buying hay that, like my first crop of hay at the end of July, the first year, was garbage. You know, I couldn't figure out why even my beef cattle weren't eating it. And I figured out that you've got to have a balance here. You can't have too much fiber in there. They're just not going to eat it. They're not getting any nutritional value or any energy out of it. So I started doing hay analysis so that I could modify my rations to make sure my animals were getting the right nutrients. And I've got a huge range of results based on where I'm not cutting on my place anymore, but when I buy, I've got my eyes wide open as to what I'm getting and what I'm going to need to supplement, if anything, based on the product I'm buying. So the hay analysis and the soil sample analysis are going to help me hopefully minimize my costs and maximize my returns. I'm not at the return point yet, but hopefully we get there.
So Dan, you talked a little bit about your approach to using analysis in your operation? Jake, I know you don't use hay analysis so much for the stuff that you're selling, but you do use forage analysis.
Yeah, for the silage.
In a variety of other stuff. We talk about a little bit about the importance that plays in that part of the operation.
Yeah, so for the hay side of things, I've been doing it long enough and I know what fields and different varieties, what grass treatments, have been done here and there, and fertility and all that. I can kind of just judge it, and when you got, a few hundred bales here, a few hundred bales there, they're going this place and that place, you'll never get a sample that's worth a lot in the sense of, that hay's already gone, that sample doesn't mean anything anymore. So you kind of just, the samplers are good to get started until you get the feel, but once you get a feel for it, you can kind of, in small amounts, but let's say you had 2,000 bales of something, that's worth sampling because that's going to stick around a little bit and that can go to a million different places. But on the side of things, that's all going in the TMR, the milk cows. So we're looking at our different levels of everything in there and our fermentations and stuff. We're using inoculants with that. So that's a valuable tool there. So you know what you got, your first cuttings versus your later cuttings. And with milk cows, you got to be careful. Your later cuttings, you can kill a lot of cows with a little bit of bad silage. So, and your first cuttings more for your dry cows or heifers if you need to feed them anything. And the way you blend everything, so it all comes together, and kind of just need to know what you're dealing with.
So we're going to walk outside here after this portion and look at some of the flakes that Jake brought up, hay that he cut, and we've got some analysis over there on the table so we can kind of compare visual quality versus what shows up in the analysis. But you were just saying, I've kind of dialed in, I know what I'm looking at when I've brought it into the barn. And maybe you could talk just a little bit, maybe as a prelude to us going outside, what you look for, and what quality indicators you like.
Yeah, so it's, with anything in life, you do it enough, you just kind of get a feel for it. It depends what people are looking for. You got your different cuttings, you got your different grasses in there, different maturity levels. Like a bent grass is a really fine, wiry grass. You only get one cutting off of it. The canary grass actually can make a really nice second and third cutting, and you can get that first off early for silage or something. So you just got to know what fields you got, different varieties. Certain people are looking for cow hay, certain people are looking for first cutting horse hay, some people want the premium fourth cutting or third cutting and stuff like that. When everything comes in the barn, I kind of divvy it out. It's all in stacks, and so I know. I'll even split a field up when it's coming in. When we pick it up, I'll hey, this corner needs to go in this trailer because it's not as good quality because someone wants something, they're coming in. I want a bale of this, and so it's not like, okay, there's a few mixed in of this, and they kind of get a hodgepodge of everything. It's no, they got, they might pay more for it, but they got exactly what they wanted. Anyhow, but I guess the best thing, or the first thing, is you can do everything you can in your own power to go chase quality, to have all these new seedings and fertility program, a lime and all that. Sometimes you just get burned with Mother Nature, though. You can only do what you can do, and you got to also know your ground. You got to know your grasses, who's buying the stuff, what equipment you have, how quickly you can get it off, what your weather windows look like. Like this year was it was a nightmare. I did small bales like 27,000 or something. I ran an hour short. I bailed the last field in the dark. I think it was the 30th of August, and they're running 32, 34, 35% moisture. I actually went to a horse guy the other day. So I left it on a trailer, and the way I stacked it, I was actually able to cure it out. And it made perfect. There's no must, no caking, nothing in it. But yeah, it's just, you just got to know your weather and what tools you have available. And unless you're hitting it hard and doing it commercially, it's hard to get your hands on those fancy tools. You just can't justify them. You'll never see $1 left after you pay for all the equipment. So you just got to know what you're dealing with. And like fertility, sometimes low fertility is a blessing on certain places. Like this year, there's a lot of places. There's one place in particular, second cutting, took the first off the end of April. It was gorgeous. Put a 33, 413 on it, 150 pounds an acre. going into May, going into early June, just gorgeous, all pre-sold 850 a bale out. Never could get to it. Never could get to it. It looked like rotten first cutting when I got to it. It was just all laid over, mangled, and it was the end of July, first part of August, and anyhow, that's a spot where, so that none of that made grade, and so that ended up going to the barn. I'll sell it for cow hay this winter, and I end up having to shuffle all those people around, which kind of sucks. You know, I didn't have to touch anything; it was all pre-sold. Just collect the money, boom, boom, boom. But that's a situation where if I wouldn't have fertilized, that might have still made grade, because it just got too thick and it just went over. So it's just know your ground, know your tools, know your weather windows. You know, it's like up in Enumclaw. There's area Cooper's Corner, which is far different than my house, by Olson's Meads, which is far different than BZ Valley, which is far different than Mount Peak, and then the Buckley. And so you just got to know your areas and, you know, how the weather rolls through. And you can, okay, I'm going to put hay down here, but I'm not going to BZ because they're saying morning clouds. That means BZ drizzle, you know. And so you just kind of got to know your area and know everything. And then once you kind of put all those together, you can just do it by feel. But until you kind of got all that down, it's nice to see some numbers to help a lot of people get started.
So what I hear you saying is, with your client base, you pretty much, it's the visual quality.
A lot of it, yeah.
Versus, okay, this is what's in the stack.
A lot's visual. You know, like they say, a rule of thumb, visual will tell you a lot about what's in it. Not necessarily, it's like feeding calves and dry cows. But the best hay we can get is showered on first cutting, like a light shower. It's brown, it's powdery, cows eat it like no other. You'd look at it like, oh, let's give them this green stuff, this third cutting, turn their nose up at it. And so it's to see, you know, sometimes, you know, you can have some great quality and not have the visuals to it. But a lot of times the visuals also bring the quality. But there's certain people, you know, they're looking, I want this fine stem, I want this quality, I'm looking for this. And so that'll go off visuals. There's other people, it's like, okay, this might not be the prettiest, but this meets the guidelines of what you're looking for. And so there's a few ways you can go about it.
So pretty much have a clientele built, or you have some turnover?
You lose. It's like doing custom work and stuff. You lose one or two places a year. A lot of times people move, they sell their animals. Like ground, you know, people move, someone new bought it, they have their own animals, they have their own guy that do stuff for them, you know. So you have a little bit, but with what I got some really good loyalty. So everything's just a phone call. Or people text me what they want for the year, and it's okay, perfect, and I add it to all my lists and everything, and pretty much just make the call. Okay, you're on vacation this day, here's the weather, here's my schedule, and here's what we can do. And I try not to touch, of my hay, I try not to touch any bales if I can help it. It's all sold right out of the field. So, which is the best situation ever.
So somebody else picks it up.
Yep, they're paying for it and picking it up.
How long do you need bales in the field?
If you're gonna, so you can go up to 3 days before you yellow the bottoms, depending on your moisture. But if you're gonna sell it, I like them picked up that night. Like if I'm gonna have to put them in the barn and resell them, because not only are they gonna pick up a little bit of moisture on the bottom, that's fine. It's the next day. When that dew hits the rest of the bale, you're gonna lose that visual quality on the rest of the bale. You're gonna get a yellowing to it. And then too, sometimes if you're baling with the dew, trying to make nice flakes and stuff like that, you'll lose that dew and you'll end up with a little bit loose strings next one. So I try not to let anything sit. You know, if someone's already paid for it and they're gonna pick it up, and it's like, okay, not my problem, I guess. I already got paid for it. If you don't pick it up, I guess I got paid enough. I can go get a cow person to come just take it from me or something, you know, make it disappear.
You said loose strings. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, like if you let them sit overnight, your strings will loosen up. Even like I run a BC 5070 hay liner. I mean, I make really nice bales. I mean, you know, when you're stacking a barn cut side up, you walk on, it's like walking on this table. You know, they're the same beautiful square shape as they were in the baler when they get loaded on a pickup out of the barn later. Nice bales, but no matter what, if you have a hot day the next day, they're still going to shrink a little bit. And so you're best not to leave them out there if you're trying to do reset. If they're for your own animals, it's not the end of the world because you have the same dry matter in the bale. You know, but when people are going off visuals mostly, that's what you have to deal with.
Talking square bale.
Square bales, yeah. Yep. So the round bales you can get away with differently. You know, like a lot of people, they use green net wrap, make their bales look better. So, but you know, and they're sitting on the ground. The net wrap's kind of, you can't really see color differences through the net wrap very well either. You just see the ends and stuff. But the round bales, you know, they're not usually not your high-end clientele base. You know, people paying the premium dollars are just kind of, they're so bales, you know, just run of the mill in a way. So.
You do custom work.
Yeah, I've a bunch of my own stuff, and I do a lot of custom work too. So.
You don't include seed, line.
So the lime stuff, I was doing logistics for them at Wilco out of Chehalis. They've been having some issues with getting trucks and their liming operation, getting up here and getting stuff rolling recently. But we've done a lot of stuff over the years with them and put down, I don't know, I think I added up 4 or 5 million pounds probably in the last 4 or 5 years.
So just experience some weird stuff with them. How far are you from the schools? So there's a school right next door, and then another 3/4 of a mile away.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, you said they can't do it.
Yeah, they've had some restructuring in their management down there and some stuff. And so they restructured their whole line program. And like when we're doing it up there, I'm doing logistics, I'm talking to the school district to go around with all the schools, and it's just, everyone thinks I'm the bad guy too, so it's actually not worth them actually a little bit of money I make off of it. So I look like the idiot there, you know, that's polluting that atmosphere.
We're still waiting on that.
But yeah, the limes are tricky. I mean, we made it work, but we're spreading, you know, 14, 15 loads at a time. So they're coming up. I was divvying it out. Here, we're going here, boom, boom, boom. Back in the day, they're having trouble with operators right now too. Back in the day, they had a few good guys, you know, we'd hammer 4 tankers out a day with 120 ton a day. So we were getting some work done. But,
So is this a concern for exposure to kids? Is that what
as you guys know, with social media these days and everyone being paranoid about everything, the minute you see a white powder in there,
no?
that's all you have to say.
It's a cloud.
I mean, and at the end of the day, the amount of lime that actually went up in the air from those tarrigators versus hit the ground is minuscule, but it looks like a lot because it's just that fine mesh that's just hanging right there, you know.
Yeah, that's just in the morning.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things where they just worry about everything and my lungs, my kids this, I'm coming to school to get my kids.
My son's got
Yeah, I mean, ideally, like when you're right next to area or spread, I mean, it's not the best to be right there. You know, it's just calcium carbonate, but it's still not the best to have it. But I mean, if you're half a mile away and you see some lime there, it's not going to hurt you. All the pollutants from that bus right there, it's going to be worse for you. You know, but it's just a modern day of agriculture and how disconnected people are, and they don't understand what's going on, and it's immediate freak out. You know, so it's anything I do commercial herbicide, and that's getting to a point where there's a lot of places I don't want to do this stuff for anyone anymore. I don't want my name on it. And, you know, all it takes is one bad deal, and you know, I got $2 million insurance policy. You know, there goes someone trying to sue me for everything I got for a $500 spray job. It's like, so it's just so hard. Everything's so urbanized these days, and you got so many people moving in, housing developments everywhere coming in, and they don't really understand what's going on, and you're kind of fighting that, and it's a losing battle. But so,
Sad commentary.
yeah,
You can do Trill line though. I mean,
that's
it's
another
more
option.
expensive,
It's
but
very expensive.
very
But
expensive.
that's more like a fancy little area you're trying to do.
and do it granular.
Okay,
It comes in a 1 ton tote.
totes. Yeah, because like the Pro Lime, I think that's like 400 some bucks
It's
a ton.
almost supposed to.
Yeah.
The bulk lime's a cheap way to go. The mesh isn't as small, so technically it takes more than a Pro Lime per acre. But there's no way possible to spread bulk lime unless you have a lime spreader. or a Terragator or something. You know, you're not just going to put that in a little 3-point cone spreader and go out there. There's no way to calibrate it, especially if you have someone that doesn't really necessarily know their machine, know their field, know what they're doing. It's like sometimes people put fertilizer in that, make one pass down their field, and they're wanting 400 pounds of fertilizer. And now they have a green spot for 20 years, or they have a dead spot. One of the two. Depends how thick they put it on. So you get a little bit of all.
Hey, that's awfully personal now.
So
On the topic of nutrients, you were talking about some of the complications with how it can affect your timing and those pieces. Dan, I know you get a piece of paper in front of you there from some of the analysis you've done on the hay that you've got over the years, and particularly before and after nutrients. Do you maybe want to talk a little bit about that, and then I can send it around to folks so they can see some of those results?
You know, I had, of course, my first year, the field was so late. I mean, everything was this tall, and it was shot. It wasn't worth.
Good betting.
Yeah, good betting, absolutely. But the next year, we went in and put in some liquid manure from the neighboring dairy, and he came out and spread it for me. My proteins went from about 7% to 12%, and it was a pretty good jump. I got as high as 13.4 on a second cutting out of one of the fields that he did for me. Conversely, the stuff that we worked with in late August this year that we all knew it was late, it was worse than my first field. It was only 5% protein, and it was real good bedding. So yeah, the fertilizer has certainly helped get the nutrients in there. You get the protein.
Do you mind if I say that?
Yeah.
So you say you're continuing to produce hay on your place? Or?
No, I stopped. I've got enough animals to not worry about hay, but my hay source is I need to get your card, but my hay source hasn't been reliable enough to get me enough quantity. So I ended up getting from 3 different areas, and all 3 sources were pretty significantly different. So the analysis, I'm not quite at the point yet where I can gauge, well, I could supplement with this much grain. But since I've got cows calving in the spring, I want to make sure that they're getting what they need so I get a good calf crop. So I go ahead and do the analysis, but at some point I probably won't need to if I get a consistent supply, consistent source, and understand what's gone on with that soil and fertilizer and whatnot.
Ask you what kind of hay you're buying.
Just local, just the local square bales, you know. Some of it's great. I got some great stuff out of Enumclaw, and but it can be all over the board. And of course, you're kind of depending on your supplier. I'd say I'd like you to cut by mid-June. Well, yeah, I got all these fields, and I probably won't get that till July 10th. Well, July 10th, my quality's just going down, and makes it tough. Makes it tough.
yeah, it's a gamble on the, you want it off by this date. It's a hard situation to be in from both sides of it too, because it's
Sure.
like your hands are tied. Like this year, I baled some hay on May 10th. I had an easier time baling hay on May 10th than I did in the month of July.
Yeah.
And
Second weekend in May is pretty much guaranteed to be nice.
well, it was the weather was just right, and the ground was just, it worked out. But it was in June we had that one window. I think it was around the 20th or something. We were like we were up there. I think 5 or 7 days window or something. knocked out like 6,000, 7,000 bales that little window. And then I came down to Ording. We knocked out 65 acres down here because it was right on the back end of the window. So we were getting showers up there, and they hadn't got them down here yet. But then I shut down for, I think it was about 5 weeks. I didn't cut a single thing. So it's kind of the deal with all my clientele, custom work, and personal stuff is the minute it gets rained on, it's not worth anything. So I got the equipment to go when it's time to go. I got a 16-foot chrome swather, and I got 30-foot tedder and 2 balers, big rakes, everything. So I rather wait 2 weeks longer and get it up in 2 days than to sit there and fight it for 4 or 5 days and get a shower on it. And up there, it's different than Eastern Washington shower. Could be a ruin the hay forever shower. And just wait and do that. But it was one of those things where with those guidelines, I hadn't had hay rain done since like 2011. And you look and it's like, chance of sprinkles. And it's like, oh.
What do you use for your weather?
NOAA hourly and the weekly with NOAA, and then also weather.com. I cross-reference it with King 5 and Como 4 after that. But NOAA's had a hard time this year. They've never been wrong so much in my whole life. This whole weather pattern we've had all year was supposed to be a hot, dry drought summer, and I kind of planned everything with the corn and the way we chopped all our silage grass and everything. The way I was setting it up is that, okay, we're gonna pull this one last cutting and we're going drought. So the way I did my time schedules and everything, and it was opposite by far.
Wow.
And but they're usually spot on. Like I use them for all my spraying because I need an hourly wins. I need to know, okay, when are we kicking up to 8? When are we kicking up 10? Is it coming out of the west? I'm next to this $1 million house. You need to know all that. And so normally they're spot on. And normally they're really good. Weather.com's good for that longer range. Now they're having trouble too. No one can do anything except for about a day out now. There's some days where they said we're supposed to get 2 tenths. We end up with 1 3/4 inches overnight.
And given the fact that we're 20% behind where we should be historically, it still presented problems also.
Yeah, so it's been a headache, and then this September hasn't been the best. To normal people out here enjoying the evening like today, oh, it's a nice, sunny, beautiful day. To them, it's this summer's been great, cool, not too hot. Sunny days, a rain shower here and there, no big deal. But when you're trying to do the hay stuff, and you're trying to swap every day and just go boom, boom, boom instead of doing it in pieces.
Who can remember over 3 inches in September?
Yeah.
And then we got a frost last night, killing frost in a lot of places up there. And so, it's just a bad deal.
So are you doing any silage or haylage?
I do grass silage,
Okay.
and then
So-
I do corn too.
Okay, so have you thought about switching some of your operations to haylage because of the cooler, if we're gonna.
You mean the hay side of things?
Yes.
No, because all that is kind of set out for different clients and the way it's already developed.
Got it.
Haylage isn't really worth anything anymore.
Really?
There's too many people doing it. There's way too much equipment up there, and there's too many haylage bales sitting everywhere.
Got
I
it.
mean, they're worth $50.
Really? I didn't know the price had gone down.
Yes, I mean, it depends where you buy them, who you buy them for, in the deals, but they're kind of worth a set amount. And you gotta have, unless you want to hire it all done, then you gotta have move them with a loader, and then you gotta have the trailers, and then it's a headache unless you're set
Even
up
your
for it.
fields, you gotta be set, I can't do it. My fields are too soft,
Yeah.
so I just tear up my ground unless I have go in and pour concrete. I can't afford it.
And then also too with those, and that's a certain clientele, that's cow clientele base, with kind of what I got, I'm chasing the premium market and stuff. So like the small bales, nothing leaves the barn this year, even the cow stuff are under probably $750. I got stuff up at $12 a bale. And so everything's kind of mostly pre-sold, a little bit extra, kind of usually goes to friends of those people. They'll call me or whatever. Hey, I got this. Hey, do you have any more of this? And whatever, and it works out. But there's just too much haylage. And you're locked into that, it's like having it baled. By the time you have it baled and moved, you have about $32, $35 a bale into it. It's worth $50. And that doesn't include the mowing and the ownership of the land or rent or all that. So
Say that again.
It doesn't, you have 32 to 35 bucks a bale into it, moving it. Just the
Oh,
baling and moving of the haylage bales.
Moving it once you've got it cut.
Yeah, for the baling and the moving of it and all that stuff. And anyhow, that doesn't include the swathing or your land rent or your opportunity cost of the land. You know, so it doesn't leave a lot left. And so it's one of those things, if you're trying to make the biggest bang for your buck off a piece of ground, you know.
I can't
So.
believe that I've understood you correctly. 35 bucks
Depends where you're going
per
with them.
acre,
No,
No.
per bale.
per bale?
The
Yeah.
haylage, you know, the
Yeah, describe that.
marshmallow.
I'm not sure I understand what haylage is, I guess.
Marshmallow bales, the white bales.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And those aren't a ton, they're 12 to 15.
They're
whatever.
whoever bales them different.
Oh,
It's like a small baler. You get one you pick up with 2 fingers,
yeah.
or you can get a nice bale. Like I've had a few people lose them off their pickup of my bales when they're leaving, you know, fields after they picked them up. They're going 35 down the road, they hit the pavement, they come back and pick them up. The strings are still on just fine, you know. And so, or you have someone else bale that accidentally kick it off the table right there and it falls apart. You know, so it's the same with haylage bales too. You got different people that make a little bit bigger bales, tighter bales.
Yeah.
So it's just like, you know, you buying hay and stuff, you're getting a little bit different from every person you buy from.
Right.
And buying per bale is the way that this local market is set up. But it sucks because you can't make that bigger bale unless it's for a certain client that appreciates it. Because people say, okay, the standard, you haven't reseeded this field, you haven't limed it, you haven't fertilized it, you haven't sprayed it, you haven't done anything. This is just local hay. This is $4.50 or $5 a bale hay. And it's like, they call you, hey, I just want some cow hay. It's like, well, I don't really have that. I have this and that, you know, it's way nicer and it's going to feed them way better. They're like, well, I only want to pay this. And I've had a few people, I was like, well, come out and look if you want. Otherwise, it's sold to other people. I'm not too worried about it. And anyhow, they look, no, this is worth $6. Yeah, this, you know, but everyone has in their mind a bale price. And so it takes, to get pretty good money per bale, it takes that time to develop that clientele base that appreciates that bale. You know, because no one wants to make a bunch of puff balls to, you know, to get, you know, sell it for $5. Fine, I'll have to make you a little pillow, basically, you know, to be equivalent. You know, to which is equivalent to $6 or $7 for a premium bale or something, you know. So it's just hard. It's hard because, you know, Eastern Washington, it's all per ton, or dairies, it's all per ton, you know. But when on smaller markets, it's all per bale.
How many bales per ton? It's just ballpark.
So it all depends because that all depends on moisture. So the tension on the baler is about the same all the time. You can end up with a 50-pound bale, or you can end up with a 70-pound bale. And it depends if you're pushing that 6% moisture probably, or if you're pushing that 21, 22, 23%. So it depends where you sit. It depends, you know, are you baling stocky straw like grass, or are you baling some really fine stem stuff that's just packing in there really good, you know? So, but, you know, as a baler guy, the one thing you really have to watch is your quality. So I don't let anyone else bale. It's kind of my thing because I watch the bales coming out. I'm watching my monitor. It's giving me my moisture every second. So if I have a spike in one corner, I can tell someone, hey, those 3 bales right there, leave those. You know, we don't have any problems. Or I'm watching it's getting dark. I'm still baling. I'm watching the dew come on. I'm going to skip over here. Or you bale smaller, or you rake smaller rows later in the night because they won't pick up the dew as fast as a bigger row. And so you can cheat it and bale an extra hour sometimes, stuff like that. But you can watch the monitor. But also, like with the New Holland baler I have, it makes on the length, it's, you know, it trips between the flakes. And so if you're not consistent on your flakes, you get the 2 to 3 inch flakes and you're pounding 6-inch flakes like some people do. So just pound bales out and you look at it, it's all goofy shaped and stuff because it's not nice flakes. Let's say you're doing 6-inch flakes, you could have some severe variability to your bale, which you wouldn't think 3 inches is much, but let's say your bales are all end up 3 inches longer.
Yeah.
Now multiply that by 20,000 bales.
Yeah.
It ends up, you know, adds up. Or you don't want to be the other way too, because the last thing you want to do is cheat someone and have smaller bales that you're not proud of. And so you got to really watch that and dial that baler to know where you're at for that consistency. So
Wow.
did that halfway answer your question?
Yeah, more than that.
Okay.
I just had an experience when I tried to
baled some of our own pastures, you know, early in the spring, and got a baler that must have been from before I was born,
Well used.
well used, and the root over, that's the mechanism for the tying string on the bales. If you don't know what you're doing, you're just pissing up the road.
Yeah, that's a fact. There's a few people I've had over the years. They're like, oh, I don't want to pay you anymore. It's too expensive. I'm gonna do it myself. So they go out, you know, they're doing 1,000 or 1,200 bales a year. They go out and buy a baler that they can afford.
Yeah.
They buy a mower they can afford, an oil tractor they can afford. And it's gonna take them 10 years just to justify all this. You know, by the time you figure in wear and tear, the initial cost, their time, because it's gonna take them forever to do it, fuel, everything involved. And then their baler's broke down. Hey, can you come bale this for me? I just can't figure out my baler. You know, so it's one of those things where the baler's a technical deal, and especially you get something older that's affordable, it's going to be worn, and you're going to have trouble with it. And so the biggest deal is people just don't know how to adjust things and what needs to adjust or what's out of whack, or you know, sometimes worn out is worn out, you know, and some balers, you know, they're going to throw a broken probably every 20 bales if there's nothing left to them and no one greased them ever. You know, but you also are trying to work with what you can afford in this day and age. You know, new balers like mine's $30,000. You know, a new swather I just got, the 16-foot pole swather, Krone, mower conditioners, $56,000. And so, you know, trying to justify that for a small hay operation, you can't. There's no way possible. That's the trickiest deal, you know, and then you're waiting on a custom guy, and the custom guy's trying the best he can do, but you also have to pick the right custom guy. You got to take someone that takes pride in your property, you know, takes pride in their work the same as you do. And so you're kind of on the same mind space with them. So you don't really have to worry about much, you know, it's just, hey, I know it's bad here, he's doing what he can do, you know, it is what it is. You can get some guys that don't care about you. You know, you're just another, maybe I'll show up, maybe I won't. So the biggest deal is you got to pick your custom guy correctly if you're going to do that route.
When you say custom guy, you mean he's in a pole?
No, your custom guy for if you're going to hire out like baling or any other farm things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, pick that very carefully. So you got to get someone you can build a relationship with and trust and know everything's good. So that's like I was saying about my baling. Now I don't want them too short either because I don't want to short anyone on stuff. But at the same time, if we agreed on the length, I don't want to short myself. But I still rather short myself than short anyone else. So I rather err on the side of a tad longer. I just don't want to get too long. So anyhow.
Yeah, we're about at the time that I had set aside for kind of this portion of the night, but happy to keep going. Folks have more questions?
It's fascinating.
Glad to hear it.
So visual stuff outside or in the
It's still in my pickup.
Yeah, we'll set up out by the load dock. Yeah.
Or we can bring it's in boxes. So
It's in boxes,
Easy
yeah.
to bring inside.
Sure. Yeah. I can
Baling
give you
20
hand-
boxes. There's 2 clicks in each of different stuff.
Yeah, I can give you a hand getting that in here.
Do you have any parting words just to kind of wrap this up?
Great question.
Computer.
Gwen, yes, thank you. And thanks everybody who did call in. Unfortunately, there's just not a good way that we can make this portion of the night work remotely. But like I said, I will try and find some good, visual hay assessments videos to send along in the follow-up email, which I usually send out within the week